Chapter 3, Psychological Development in Infancy and Childhood. These are the learning objectives for Chapter 3. Here is a continuation of the learning objectives. Feel free to pause. Psychological theories about personality development. So personality is a complex cluster of mental, emotional, and behavioral characteristics. It's basically what makes a person, what distinguishes them from another person. There are some psychological theories we will go over in this chapter. The psychodynamic conceptual framework is a main one that we talk about when it comes to psychology or sociology, and it deals with Freud's concept of the conscious, preconscious, and the unconscious. And this all deals with repression. So there is the id, superego, and ego. The id are the primitive forces that we have. It deals with our basic needs for things such as hunger, thirst, self-preservation, and Freud also talked about sex when it came to that, and that everything as far as the id goes would be governed or led by the pleasure principle. So whatever would make somebody feel good. Then there is the ego, and it's where a person has the rational portion of their minds. It deals with experience, controls of thinking, and it helps balance the id. The ego deals with consequences. It deals with thinking plans through or thinking thoughts through, and it helps somebody evaluate how they should do things. The superego is the third part of the mind that Freud taught, and this deals with traditional values and what society values. So it helps somebody determine if something's right or wrong. Freud also went into psychosexual development. I'm not going to go into that too much. Basically, Freud believed everything dealt with sex and that there were different stages that people went through. And everything had to basically deal with people's holes as far as their mouth or their anus. And then Freud talked about how that would affect people as they're growing, and the dynamic between a mother and father, and the dynamic between a mother and daughter, and a dynamic between a son and daughter. A lot of that is strange and outdated. But if you want to read more into that, that's on page 98 through 101 in the textbook. Some people didn't fully subscribe to the sexual part, especially when it came to people that are younger. So they will call those people neo-Freudian theorists. And one of them was Carl Jung, who dealt with analytic psychology. He basically thought of the mind and how people think, and the information that they receive from their parents, and over time that's passed down. And he kept like the sexual complexes out of it. Alfred Adler was another person that believed in Freudism, but without the sex also. And he focused on individual psychology. So what's going on with the individual person through any social action, what makes them develop, how do they deal with interactions, how does their environment have an effect on them as an individual. And then he basically talked about how that helps with someone's personality development over time as they age. There are some other people that believed in Freud, and a lot of his ideals, but they focus more on the brain, and becoming a better person. Carl Rogers is another major person that you might hear a lot about, and he dealt with therapy, just thinking about a person and thinking about what they need as an individual, how do they see themselves. such as their face value, their self-concept, what they believe that they can accomplish, and hoping that people one day get to self-actualization where they are able to think outside themselves, think outside of their own weaknesses and their own positives and their strengths and their personality. And once they reach self-actualization, they're able to enhance who they are and create things. And it's also been believed by some theorists that a lot of people don't reach self-actualization. If you think about it, a lot of people might be bogged down with work or other responsibilities, so they don't have time to create new things and become inventors. So there are some psychological theories that support those ideas. And then there are some types of feminist frameworks. There are some theories as far as it comes to feminism, and a good way of looking at it is on page 107. The textbook breaks it down. So there's different types of feminism as far as wanting equality, as far as wanting to change the traditional values of how a woman was viewed, and allowing her to be more than just for creating babies and more for more than reproduction and child rearing. That she's an individual, that she's allowed to work, that she counts in a family, that she wants society to be more equal, that, women, as far as feminism goes, says they should be empowered, that they should be viewed as an equal product that can do equal work in a lot of situations. They don't talk about all situations, but it depends on the particular theory within feminism that a person might be studying. They do look at dealing with politics and the macro system overall and how things can be changed. They mention a lot about sexism, prejudice, and discrimination that women might experience, and they also bring up diversity. And that's more so when they, as far as feminism goes, looking into what a woman might go through. So yes, she's a woman, so she might deal with sexism, but also she might be someone that's disabled, or she might be black or indigenous or a person of color. She might be someone that is a woman and also poor, or a woman that's also uneducated as far as, society goes with education and what's needed for jobs or what's demanded as far as jobs go. So there's different types of feminism that the book talks about. There's liberal feminism that says that women should have equal rights across the board when it comes to men. They focus on the fact that there's still a discrepancy. There's a gap in pay when it comes to men and women still in the workplace. It has been closing over time, but it's still there. And then there's also a gap when it comes to somebody's hue or their race or culture. It talks about gender segregation as far as men being in certain jobs and women being more dominant in certain jobs, and they want women to perform the same as men in certain jobs. So they might be the type of feminism that might want women in combat or in construction work, things like that. They also talk about the glass ceiling, where you might have heard that theory before, but it says that women might hit a glass ceiling as far as when it comes to the amount of money she can make, or the amount that society will value her because she is a woman. Moving on to another part of feminism, which would be cultural feminism, and it talks about that women have qualities that make them different from men, but those qualities should be revered or have rapport, respect, trust, and they place importance on nurturing. It could be a relationship, could be people, it could be their own children, their families, their job, the creations as far as creating businesses, how they feel connected to other women, and dealing with the women's intuition. That they just know certain things and they learn to trust themselves and lean on that. Another type of feminism that the textbook goes into is Marxist or socialist feminism. And it talks about how women may be oppressed in certain situations, and then how to deal with that. And they might already be oppressed because there's a woman, but they might also deal with other things. They think a way to deal with this in a capitalistic society, which demands that people work all the time, but women if they want to have families, have to take time off of work, usually due to pregnancy or taking care of the kid once they're born, or of course later on, depending on the family's dynamic. So it basically talks about women should be paid for household work and labor. And hopefully they will want the government to subsidize some of that so women could take more time off from work, not just the 6 to 8 weeks, and be able to focus more on their kids, be able to focus more on their family and their home and nesting that women go through. Um, they are the ones who might calculate how much time women spend with child rearing and how that would translate into dollars. So you've probably heard some of those articles going around, and that comes from Marxist or socialist feminism. Of course, when it comes to child rearing and the amount of pay, it differs by country. What people are, like the amount of time people are given, or if they're given any subsidies or any money from the government for spending more time with their kid and teaching them. And then it also differs by state. Like states like California will have paternity leave, which is for fathers to have some time off from work. Also, so some people might have the woman take time off work and then the man take time off work so they can um, have more time overall with the kids. Or if it's, same sex couples, they would fall into that also. It wouldn't just be maternity leave if someone's technically not a woman. And then moving on to radical feminism. It's like a combination of liberal feminism and cultural feminism. They spend a lot of time thinking about patriarchy and the way the world is male-centered. They, as far as this type of feminism goes, want women to start focusing on themselves and their ways of living and what would make things better for women. They a lot of times advocate for living separately. You might have heard of like the 4B movement in Korea, or some women here are just opting out. And that just means that they're focusing on what they want in their dreams and they're deciding not to get married or not to date or not to participate in sex. Um, then there's postmodern feminism, and that is more for academics. And they want to deal with research and how women are viewed in research and um, colleges and jobs and what can be done differently. A lot of the times medications might be tested primarily on men. Um, so they want to be included more in studies or in academic work and research. They also want to deal with deconstruction, and that's just basically taking the ideas that they believe society has pushed on them as far as how things should be done and how things should be ran, and they want to have women as more of their focus. They want to basically decenter men or not have men at the center of their lives. As far as like maybe if you think about like a Disney movie, the princess wants to marry the prince and they should be happily ever after. These people who believe in postmodern feminism don't believe in that. They focus on like the woman and her growth over time and what matters to her, and just thinking about what is happening in society and how they can unpack those things and no longer focus on those things. Then there's diversity and intersectionality, and that's basically the idea that a person could be a woman, more so white women, or so and/or they could be a person, as I mentioned before, but also have other things they deal with, like a woman who's black and disabled, or a person who's queer, they're a woman and they're white, or the different combinations of things people might have to deal with that change their reality, or how the world views them. Then there's also the feminist future that was added into this textbook, and it deals with having a focus on emotions that women deal with, as far as depression and anxiety, the issues that women might face when it comes to gender roles and trying to rectify that, and then also putting in their cultural expectations. It's like some societies might be male-centered or male-dominant cultures. So just taking all that in and figuring out where they can find rights and expand their roles as women and have society also accept the new expanded roles as women. So there are various theories in this textbook that goes along with that. thinking about the relevance of theory to social work. So they basically are proponents of various theories, but using that to focus on the strengths of a person or a group of people. And that's what social workers would do in order to help people. They want to move away from the medical model, which would be labeling people, diagnosing people, using medical interventions for that. They also want to deal with advocacy, research, psychology, counseling, different types of therapy, and they want to add systems as far as community programs to basically deal with what society might have thrown at them. So it's basically evaluating different theories and making it more than just medical when dealing with a person that might have an issue, such as, being bipolar. And then also there are theories that look at diversity. If you want to know a lot about that, that is on page 112 to 114 in the textbook. It talks about the worldview when it comes to psychology and different types of theories, and just understanding that different theories might not fit everyone or every situation, especially because different cultures have different values. So this will not fit everybody. Like whatever theory you might be looking at, especially if it's learned in the US, it might not fit somebody who lives in Paraguay. It just depends on the systems that you're looking at and then also the types of theories that you're looking at. But they want people to have a worldview and realize that there's more out there than just these certain theories, and that people's perceptions, the way society is going at that certain time, people's legal rights, economic status, social status, social rules, all of that plays a role when dealing with theories. So basically everyone doesn't fit into a theory. There's also spirituality, because with science it doesn't typically include spirituality, and that depends on the culture. It doesn't include like a religion also. So they want people to take that into context, because as a social worker, in order to help somebody, you have to have an understanding of them and their spirituality slash religion that they deal with, as far as hope, support, guidance, the religious leaders, their values, their awareness, their mission. All of that will help with dealing with any situation when it comes to social work. And the strengths perspective focuses on what is already that person's strength, or what strengths does that community or culture already have. I mean, do they lean on one another? Is it something where if one person is sick in the family that everybody is dealing with it versus isolating them? So all those need to be taken into account, is basically what the relevance of theory to social work is getting to. Piaget is another developmental psychologist that you will hear a lot about. Piaget talked about children aging, and the sensory motor period is from birth to the age of 2. It's where children learn that they have various senses where they can receive information. So they might receive information through speaking, through visually, through touching, through putting things in their mouth, through tasting, and they also work toward goal-oriented behavior. So like they want to get something accomplished, and that might mean making eye contact or calling their parent's name or singing a certain song, or trying to play peekaboo. Also, children deal with object permanence. So initially, once an object is out of their way, like maybe their favorite blanket or ball, it's like out of sight, out of mind, or they think it's just gone. Or like if their parents, go to another room, they think the parents are gone, which is sometimes why kids cry when parents do that initially while they're still young, still in the infant stage, but eventually they get object permanence where they realize, like, even if I don't see mommy, she's in the other room, or I can still hear her, and it's okay. Also, children get a representation, so they might know what their blanket looks like, and they'll do things to get it, like maybe crawling from room to room, or they'll say, mommy, I want yellow, or blanket yellow, or, something like that, and they're basically know what it looks like, and they're trying to figure out a way to get to their goal, which would be to get the blanket back. And they have in their mind, they're able to visualize what it is that they want. The pre-operational period, according to Piaget, is from ages 2 to 7, and that deals with abstract logic and perception. Children are able to remember things and able to solve problems. So children have more experiences that are physical, and then also experiences that make them think. And then they have opinions on what those situations are. It doesn't have to be anything dramatic. It could be something like a birthday party, or the first time swimming, or taking them to the park, school, daycare. And there are some barriers when it comes to development that Piaget called them barriers, but it's just things that kids haven't reached yet at that age. They could be egocentric, before the age of 4. That just means that they think about themselves and the world is viewed through their own eyes. They're unable to see like other people's opinions or how other people feel about something that they might want or need. So like say you're tired and you just sit down and you just need like 5 minutes, and your kid might crawl on you or say your name over and over and over and try to let you know they want something. And it's not that they're, they don't care that you're tired or don't care about how your day was. It's just that they're unable to see outside themselves at that point in their lives. So everything's just about them. So it's like me, 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 me. And, that's just how humans develop over time. So children definitely think about themselves, and then also it moves on to centration, and that's where children are only able to think about one idea or one detail of a situation. So they might think about their blanket being soft. They don't think about how big it is. Or if they're thinking about the size of their blanket, they're not thinking about how soft it is. The textbook uses a glass of water if you have a tall glass versus a wide glass, and same amount of water, and you pour it from the tall glass to the wider bowl. And if kids will realize it's the same amount, and they don't realize it's the same amount because they can only think of one aspect or one detail of an idea. Later on, when they get older, when they're 7, 8, they're able to realize like, oh, there's more. Irreversibility is how a kid thinks. So they can think like of the process of A through Z, but some of them, because this is for the average child, and this is just studies that Piaget did with his own kids. It's not like it was replicated over and over and over and over with different groups of people, different cultures, different ages, all of that. But just saying that the average 4-year-old might know the steps that it takes to use the potty, but they wouldn't be able to tell you the steps of it backwards. They might be able to say, wash your hands, and then they're like, I don't know. And they're not trying. It's just that it's difficult for them to do something backwards. It doesn't mean you shouldn't, introduce it to them. It just means that they might need more help. So as far as cognitive ability goes and thinking, it's important to think about how children learn to classify things, just like sorting things in their minds. Seriation talks about how children think of things in certain characteristics. So they might say, oh, all these are cars, so they're playing with all their cars. They might not think about, oh, this is a blue car, this is a yellow car, this is an orange car. So that's when parents or daycare or teachers start doing activities like put all the orange things over here. Or a teacher might say, this is a square, can you find another square in this classroom? And a kid might go to a desk or a book or a picture on the wall and say this is a square, but initially they might need help learning those things. Conservation is a thing that I talked about when it comes to like the glass of water having the same amount, but like you're putting it in a wider cup or like a bowl instead of a glass, and they don't realize like the shape or position doesn't changing, that they don't realize that even though the shape and position is changing, it doesn't mean that it isn't less anymore. If something just seems bigger, then it's just bigger. So maybe because it's in the bowl now, they're like, oh, that's bigger. That's just part of how they learn things over time. So moving on to ages 7 to about 12 years old, children are able to be logical and think concretely. So think about things that are actually there and how the world is. So they can see from other people's points of view, so they can have empathy. They can realize like, oh my gosh, I hurt this person's feelings, or maybe I can't watch my favorite show all day because my sibling might want to do something else, and it's okay. They will become more helpful, ask more questions, trying to understand things, see how other people feel about certain things. They take a lot of things into account, the way the parent reacts to the situations or questions that they bring up, the way other children react, like when they ask questions in class or if they say something. So children kind of pay more attention to like the do's and don'ts. Like if everyone's talking about vacation and someone just blurts out something that's completely unrelated, other kids might just look at them or not respond and then talk to the kids who's talking about the vacation that they're all excited about. So they think about what they can hear, smell, see, touch. They think of things that are there. Things that are like concrete, tangible, things that are right in front of them, things that they see or have experienced. The formal operational stage is where they start to think of ideas. They start to think of, if I were president, what would I do? Like, what would I run on, or what would I want to change? They might think about creating things. If they want to create something to make things easier in their household, or maybe even their own schedules. If they want to spend more time with their siblings or have to get a project done, they're able to like schedule it out and have a whole thought process of the idea of getting up at this time for their favorite sports games, or getting up at this time in order to complete their project. So they start to think about if then. So if this happens, like if it rains today, then will my game be canceled or will it not be canceled? If this happens, if the weather is bad during graduation, maybe I should wear a certain type of shoe instead of the other shoe they were going to wear. So it could be something serious or something more light, like thinking about shoes. They start to also think about how society views things. So it could be something that's good or bad. So if the parents have a lot of negative, biases or views of things, then the kid's going to take that on. But if they meet another kid who doesn't really fit the biases that their parents taught them, they might say something that is mean, but they'll be able to take in like, oh, I actually hurt their feelings, and oh, I don't like how that feels, and this person isn't exactly like, I've heard, so maybe this is a little different. Maybe I do like this person for who they are versus what I've been told or what I've heard. That's where kids think more about their peers and more about their wants, but they still take into account society and their families, their teachers. When it comes to development, it's important to think of how the brain processes information. So there's memory, and that's how people store and retrieve information. They can selectively retrieve it later or selectively pay attention to things. Of course, that's going to take time. You think about how people process information, how they take in information. People learn differently. Children learn differently. Some like to be hands-on. Some like to watch first. Some might be shy of learning. Like feeling a little insecure about certain things. Some might be gung-ho and like, just ready to do it, but they haven't fully listened. So you just kind of have to adjust the teaching depending on the child and what they're dealing with at the time. There's sensory memory, and that's kind of like where their senses help with that. So when people think of going to the movies, they might think of popcorn, and candy smells, and the drinks. They think of the fair, they might think of a lot of fried foods and the sound of kids and families just having fun on rides, and it being very loud. So that's sensory memory. Or like if you smell a certain perfume or cologne, and it reminds you of a certain time period, or if you think of a certain song, it might take you way back to the good old days. So there's short-term memory and working memory. Short-term memory is only for a short amount of time. It can be up to 30 seconds. So sometimes that is transferred into long-term memory. Other times it's not. It's just what the person is dealing with right then. And then as far as long-term memory goes, it's organized in your memory, and a person is able to get that information out later to retrieve it. There's different strategies when it comes to dealing with memory. So this is really helpful when it comes to studying. a lot of this you've already done in grade school, and that's because those are tried and true things that actually work. Which one is repetition for yourself or for your kids or family is just repeating whatever it is that you want to learn, or if someone's like think of politicians when they repeat certain phrases and slogans, it gets it in people's heads. If you think about commercials, they get it in your head. The reason why they play the same commercials over and over and over is to make you associate it with something else. So like next time you're hungry, you might think, oh, I want to go to this fast food place or that, instead of, maybe going into your kitchen and getting a glass of water. It's just because they know they can put it in your long-term memory, and they can use senses to help you associate that with hunger later. Um, just like when people watch movies and they eat, so then like later on whenever they're watching something, they might want to eat something. So if they're sitting for a long time watching things, they might want to eat for a long time. It's just connections that people make in their brain when it comes to storing information and sensory memory. But besides repetition, as a good way of putting things in your long-term memory, there's organization. So organizing information into schemas or information in a way that you can relate it. So usually with my students in different classes, I will give an example of something, probably a dramatic one, but it helps students remember, because usually when we're like in class, I might give an example and they're like, oh, or I'll try to give an example of like something that's common as far as like going to the doctor or family members or dynamics with friends or dealing with coworkers. So that way, whatever you're learning, you can apply it to something that matters to you now. And then usually that'll help you remember whatever it might be. Elaborating is having a way to increase how you're going to get this information back. So relating it to something that's well known. Um, like if you think of math, I know where I'm from, we learned please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, and that was just a way of remembering how to organize in your head exactly how to, in which order, how to do equations. And then moving on, there are more strategies. Another good one that's not mentioned in this book, well, one that is mentioned in this book is relating words to other things that you might think about. So if someone's learning their A's and they say alligator or apple, it's a way of associating that letter with that word and showing it over and over and showing the pictures and vivid colors to get people to remember it. Some things I have used as a lifelong learner, because I, will always learn, is color coding things. Sometimes that helps. So maybe putting all vocabulary words, like highlight it all in yellow, things that I feel like I read through but maybe need some help with, I might highlight in orange. I might take notes on the side of the book. So it just depends on the person and how they want to do things. Um, Sometimes I would write notes in shorthand if it's something that I just feel like, oh, this is like review. Other times I would write like a sentence or write it in cursive. So for me, that meant something different than if I wrote it in print. You tell I've been in school for a long time. Also, taking naps helps. So whatever you were just doing before you went to bed or, took a nap will usually be recalled later, when you wake up, or a little bit later after that, after you got yourself together. So I think studying for a while and then making sure you get good sleep is a good way to help you retain stuff. Turning terms or information that you need into a song, that's a way, or putting it to a certain beat. Wearing the same type of clothing or the same outfit that you were learning something in could help you with association, to recall that later on for an exam. Sitting in the same places in class a lot of the time helps with attention and memory. Or if you worked in a group and you studied with your friends, it could be like for accountability, like everybody comes to this one area and just sits and do their work. Or, since there's lots of ways online to do things, sometimes for the PhD, some of my friends, we would all just be on a Zoom call but not speaking. So we're all working to make sure we're all working, like when I had to take the classes. So we would do that, and if anybody had a question or something, there was always someone available to answer or help them with a concept or idea, but it was just a way of supporting one another. Another thing could be teaching that information back to somebody, even if they don't know exactly what you're learning. Um, because of the stress of having to teach it back, you can use that stress for good. So your cortisol is going to increase, your heart rate is going to increase, and that's going to help you with the memory later on. Um, so having to teach it back to somebody helps, or explaining it to them helps. There's different things you can do. You can also Google ways or use AI to ask for ways to help you study or remember things. But memory retention, as far as being in school, is just always great, especially since you guys have state exams and licenses and all that you have to get through besides just class. Liv Vygotsky's theory of cognitive development dealt with how children think and how that's influenced by who they're around socially. So that could be family, daycare, friends, and the cultural context that they're in. So there are various cultures, and there's co-cultures, which are cultures within other cultures. So that could deal with foods, language, nationality, it could deal with race, it could deal with hobbies. So children develop basically by what they're around. And then they have the zone of proximal development, and that's basically where a kid is at the point where they have almost mastered something, so they just need a little bit of help and pushing forward. Vygotsky also dealt with development of a child and how they have interactions with people to learn. And they also observe, watch, they have symbols, and they put things into schemas, which is just a way of organizing information. And they deal with a lot of interactions with other people, and that helps solidify their personality and their thoughts on things. Another topic of Vygotsky is scaffolding and private speech. And scaffolding is where adults help children learn how to think or support them. They help them solve problems. They help them make sense of whatever they're asking or talking about, explaining things, helping children make the connections. And then there's also private speech, and that's like if someone's drawing something or doing something and they're having self-talk or talking to themselves, and it's not really for other people. It might help them remember things or help them to talk about it, like if they're drawing a picture. Dealing with emotions. So upon birth, infants are able to display interest, disgust, and distress. Sometimes they also can do surprise, anger, and sadness during the 3rd or 4th month. And this is just on average. It doesn't mean everybody follows the exact same pattern at the exact same time. Around month 5 through 7, there's fear and self-awareness. So they might start looking at their hands a lot, or reacting more to laughing, maybe trying to make themselves laugh, or noticing that if they hold your eye contact, you might come over to them more. Or, of course, the crying, depending on how the parents react to it, then they know that that is something to help them versus not helping them meet their goal. Crying is important when it comes to babies and communication. There's the basic cry or the hunger cry. And there is a pattern for that. It's rhythmic. They might whistle. There's the angry cry, and that's where the baby is forcing it. They usually turn red and seem more upset. And then the pain cry, that's usually really easy for people to distinguish. It's just a lot of screaming, and there isn't like moaning or like complaints in it. It's just a scream of just pain, and you know that they have gotten hurt in some kind of way. Also, children, when it comes to crying, that's also cultural. So just know that this is just in this context, thinking about the American context, because some cultures, for them, the baby is meant to be with the mother for a long period of time. The book kind of goes into that a little bit, and the parental responses are different, so they might participate more in co-sleeping or carrying the baby on their back while they're doing their daily activities. So the kid is constantly around other people. So that is part of that is something that needs to be taken into context when looking into these theories. Moving on to smiling and laughing. That is very good for babies. Eye contact, all of that. It helps the relationship be stronger between the parent and child. Sometimes initially kids might have a smiling reflex like while they're sleeping due to their central nervous system, but later on, about 6 to 8 weeks, they can see something and laugh or smile. That's usually seen in their parents' faces or maybe something that they like. Then there's social smiling that occurs, or hearing the voice, and smiling increases over time. Then later on, kids are able to initiate their own laughing or situations to create smiles. It won't just be like an automatic reaction. And usually kids will keep that up if the parents or whoever is around them a lot responds positively to it. So positive reinforcement. And just remember that there are differences with every culture when it comes to this, and because there are different child rearing practices. And then dealing with attachment, that's big in psychology, and it's also big in sociology, dealing with the different types of attachment. So, an attachment deals with the parents and the kid and the relationship and how they deal with new situations. So, there are different types of attachments. There is the pre-attachment stage, the attachment and the making, then the attachment and the reciprocal relationships, and that's when kids learn to go back and forth with their parents. Like, the parents might be talking and the child might be getting to coo. Before that, it's more of the kid needing more love and trust. That helps kids thrive. So that's very important. And then there are patterns when it comes to attachment. So if kids are separated from their parents, they might be distressed. And then other times they might, like when a parent comes back, they feel happy. They'll calm down when the parent is back and they'll be able to explore the environment. And that's like the best type of attachment you would want, which would be a secure attachment. The kid feels love and trust and they know they're going to be safe. There is anxious avoidant attachment. So the child wants to be around the mother or the parent, but they might not really come up to her, or they avoid contact with her in some way. They kind of ignore their parent, but it's because the parent ignores them half the time. And so they don't show as much distress when the parent leaves them, whether it's a new situation or being left alone, because that's just how it's been for them. They might have a harder time being calmed down later because they don't know like what to expect next. And also the mother might be a danger to them. So the child knows that they love this person and wants to be near them, but they're also dangerous. Then there's the anxious resistant attachment. And that's where kids are cautious. They don't explore. They just seem to feel unsafe. They might be angry. They're hard to soothe. And it's because their parents or their mother is inconsistent with how she deals with the child. So sometimes the child doesn't know how to respond. They're not getting like the proper cues, or their cues are to be inconsistent also. So that's what they learn. And then there's disorganized attachment, and that's when the mother is like not really present, or the parents aren't present. They aren't there for the kid when they're having issues. Their behavior is contradictory. They might leave the kid alone by themselves a lot. The parent or mother might be, I keep saying mother because the book uses the term mother when explaining this theory in particular, because of the way it was posited or the way it was explained when it was initially explained. So basically, the kids might be frightened of their parents, so the kid might feel helpless, and the kid might cry and scream a lot and then feel confused, and that could be because of the negativeness that the kid gets from the parent as far as being hostile or being abused. So those are different types of attachment. So long-term effects, if someone deals with positive attachment or secure attachment, they're able to carry that into adulthood. So they're able to make relationship with friends and to actually be in a healthy relationship later, because they have that security and the trust, and that the first relationships are with parents. They also do better when it comes to work environments and just dealing with changes over time because they've had that stability. When it comes to daycare, it's very important that the parents are able to put the kid into a positive daycare. Of course, sometimes people don't have as many choices as they would like when it comes to daycare, but this book does give some things for parents to look out for. Um, so it's important that there be a small staff to child ratio so the child gets enough attention, and so no more than 12 to 15 kids. Um, that the caregivers are trained in different ways in managing children, that the staff is consistent so the kids get to know them and feel secure and trust with that, and that they have experiences that have an order that are predictable. They have lunch at a certain time, they do their homework in a certain way, they do their activities in a certain way, sitting in certain places, or the naps are at a certain time. It helps kids deal with life and just learning things when they have predictability, because predictability to children is stability. And even in your adult life, you might find more peace when things are scheduled or predictable in a certain way. Self-esteem is where a person has a judgment of themselves and their own values, their self-worth. Self-concept deals with what they can do about themselves to continue living. How do they feel about themselves and their ability to continue living, to continue working, to continue accomplishing anything. So it's important that somebody feels good about themselves. Um, they have opinions about their own traits, their personality, and their attributes. Of course, there are negative effects to self-concept, but we like to focus on the positive effects for now. So basically, we want people to have a global self-worth, and that is where people believe that they're able to accomplish things, that they believe they're smart, that they're competent, that they're able to take care of things. Also, self-esteem deals with the amount of support they get from parents, especially family, friends. So no matter what the child is going through when it comes to learning, if they have the support of their parents and their teachers, that's really going to help in any situation, increase their self-worth and the way they view themselves. And also, later on, after that, children learn to look at, it says from grades 3 to 5 or 6 to 8, children learn to view their physical appearance. So, of course, this wouldn't work for all societies and all cultures. It's just the ones that have a narrative or an idea of how people should look or should want to look. Those that focus on societies that focus on magazines, television, video, eugenics, commercials, things like that, that help children deal with their self-worth. As far as it comes to thinking about how attractive they are or aren't according to other people and according to the world. That doesn't, of course, as I mentioned, doesn't go into all societies, because some societies, they don't even watch TV, and there wouldn't be a high focus on that. It might be a high focus on how much work that they do to contribute to a particular society that they live in. And also, on top of that, the third significant portion of having an effect on their mood, after the parents and how much support they get from teachers and how much they deal with their physical appearance, then we look at people's emotions and how happy they are. How do they view themselves? How is their affect, or which is like their emotions? And usually people that have a positive self-concept are ready to try new things as far as kids go. They view themselves positively. They believe people will help them. They can handle criticism, so they can maybe make corrections in whatever it is that they might need to improve upon. And of course, those people go on to live healthier, happier relationships. It doesn't mean other people can't. It just means that it might take them longer, or they might have to unpack some things in counseling or just life experience um, in order to deal with their self-worth. So there are significant issues in life events that can happen that can be negative. It could be divorce. It could be dealing with terrorism. It could be dealing with um, racism. It could be dealing with teachers that aren't supportive or a family that's lacking. It could be poverty. It could be dealing with intellectual disabilities, biases as far as culture goes, learning disabilities, being unable to focus in class, and recognizing the way people respond to that. There is intelligence testing. A lot of it comes out of eugenics and the belief that some people are able to think more, are better people than others, dealing with the shape of people's heads, the color of their skin, um, their physical attributes that they place on them. So, but what we're more going to focus on would be fluid intelligence, crystallized intelligence, IQ tests that are used for children when it comes to disabilities and when it comes to gifted programs. That's more of how we're going to look at intelligence in social work. So there's fluid intelligence, and that is this person's natural ability to solve problems, to do well in like a school-based setting. And then there's crystallized intelligence, and that's just intelligence that can be built upon. It's like kids learning the basic concepts of math and then moving up the different steps. Also, there is a lot placed on verbal communication. So, of course, that's going to not apply to everyone that has a disability. It just depends on the type of disability. But that is noted in this textbook when it comes to IQ tests. There is Steinberg's triarchic theory of intelligence. And they basically focus on the computational element of how people think, how they understand information, how they process it. And also for people who are good at like debating and understanding like what the world expects when it comes to intelligence tests, and passing those tests and getting high scores and scoring well on the tests given in class. Then there is experimental, and that's if a person is able to accomplish a task and how well they're able to accomplish a task. There are tests that deal with IQ, and it basically looks at how a person can do well on tests, and then how do they compare to a group of others that are taking the tests around the same time. Then there is the Stanford-Binet IQ test. It can be given from age 2 to adulthood. It deals with verbal ability, nonverbal ability, fluid reasoning, so seeing if people can understand examples or analogies, knowledge, qualitative reasoning, which would be solving math problems, visual spatial processing, such as completing a puzzle, and memory. So a lot of that is placed on children, depending on where they might need to be placed when it comes to classes or grades or different programs. So there are tests that just deal with verbal comprehension for the most part, and then also their perceptual reasoning, so having them complete a task and someone is observing them, and then dealing with memory and patterns, and how they can process and retrieve that information and how fast they can go as far as reading or understanding or taking a test. Then there are tests for people that are listed as gifted. They're high achievers. They're able to pick things up quick. They're able to do things more academically. So they'll typically do well on different tests and gifted programs. And basically that helps the government decide how much money should be allotted to people like that. There are no federal mandates for that, but specific states might look into what they can do for kids that are considered gifted and how they can foster that. Unless, of course, the parents have the access to, like a private school or schools that focus on certain abilities, or private tutoring, or programs that are, where they have school, like some kids go through Russian math, on top of the other types of math and education that they learn, international math, things like that. So they look at when it comes to these tests, intellectual ability, academic aptitude, creative or productive thinking, leadership, and visual and performing arts. So they can have analytic abilities, and that's how they solve problems. They might already have the ability to do that at a young age. They can look at synthetics, and that's the ability for the person to be creative, imagine. Some people have great imaginations. They're able to create things based off of those imaginations. Um, so they might be someone that you would think of as a prodigy or a child that already has their own business. And being practical, how they're able to deal with daily life experiences and how they're able to care for themselves and go through typical daily routines for a child of a certain age. Of course, there are issues when it comes to the IQ test. There are critiques that you could have because of cultural bias, because of poverty, because placing labels on people where they don't feel as smart could result in self-fulfilling prophecies where someone doesn't believe they're smart, so they try less over time because they just already don't believe in themselves, and it deals with self-concept and self-esteem. So there are some issues when it comes to IQ tests, but there are some benefits when it comes to IQ tests. There are intellectual disabilities that are taken into account when it comes to IQ tests, when it comes to empowerment and disabilities and placing kids in certain grades or in special education programs or having IEPs. So all of that is going to be discussed here. It used to be, it used to go by another name, but according to the American Psychiatric Association, it's now labeled intellectual disability. And it basically means that a person might have an issue doing certain things that other people can do. It could be understanding, it could be that they can't hear, it could be that they can't retrieve the information, that they can't process the information. They might score significantly low or below average on an exam. It might be that they're unable to adapt to life functions and take care of themselves. It's important that we look at how people are socialized into society when they're dealing with a disability. So if you want to know the numbers when it comes to disabilities, on page 143, it'll say Spotlight 3.7. It talks about diversity and disability, like the Special Olympics. And then it gives you the actual numbers from mild to profound when it deals with the level of disability a person could be at. So there was the development of the American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, and they basically talk about having a positive environment, a social environment, a linguistic environment, and an environment that focuses and enhances their cultural differences, just basically including people with disabilities into the bigger world, or the world of people that have the average or normal or exceptional functioning. Of course, laws deal with disability because if, a lot of laws deal with the funding and the amount of money that can be allotted to people with disabilities when it comes to public school. So that is part of the macro system. And social workers are able to use these roles and to give support. So there's different types of support people might need. It might be just a little bit of support. It might be weekly support. It might be support every day, like almost every waking moment of their life. Like they might have a round the clock nurse. It just depends on what the people are dealing with. So a lot of people with disabilities are unable to work. They live in poverty. If you compare it to, I guess, the general population, they have reported discrimination and being victims of that. They have reported being victimized on their job. They have reported that it has had an effect on their quality of life, and they have reported that they make less money than other people. So the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services deals with disability, and the rest of it is for the Department of Education to determine, how many programs are there, how much is actually covered when it comes to Medicaid or Medicare, when it comes to funding. So some kids might have to go to a special school. Like there's our schools for kids that are autistic, and it's to help them learn to deal with their autism in progressive ways, highlighting their strengths, and then also being able to deal with the way the rest of the world is going to interpret things and deal with things like a regular classroom setting versus having a therapist with them 24/7. So there are different levels to it, but basically the Department of Education is there to make sure that, at least when it comes to disabilities, it deals with kids that are disabled. I already mentioned funding. It deals with what programs are there for them. It deals with protections of them not being kicked out of schools. Like it might not be that they're bad. It might be that this person just has a disability. It could be looked at as hyperactivity where they're having issues focusing or issues getting their work done. And then maybe having a therapist or medication or therapy for the family or someone to come in and help. There might be services in the community, and that is through the government. Um, Back in the day, people with disabilities, as we know, were put in asylums or institutions and just left there and just drugged or left there to rot. So basically, the government now will focus more on deinstitutionalization and just making sure that people with disabilities are still able to be with other people and try to make their lives resemble what other people deal with. So it helps them deal with the real world and deal with friends, family, the education system, work, as much as they can. So they're not isolated and put away as people were done before. There's been so much documentation and research done about institutions, that the amount of money it costs to institutionalize people versus teaching them habits and coping mechanisms of how to deal with their disability, but just putting them in institutions and asylums. A lot of people receive terrible treatment or no treatment at all, or they're experimented on or abused, physically or sexually, and then also costs a lot of money to have people in asylums living there for however long their disability is known. So as social workers, they can be enablers, they can help people, they can be brokers, they can place people with jobs that take on people with disabilities, they can educate them. So dealing with people with intellectual disabilities, they might need more information on jobs or completing a GED. They may also serve as coordinators to help people find services in their area. It might be speech therapy or occupational therapy. Also, of course, advocates, negotiators, initiators, just finding information to help them evaluate if they're disabled, at what level, what type of help do they need, like what level of help and what's available to them. And then also advocate for them to have more resources from the federal government and state government just to make sure people with disabilities are no longer pushed into the margins of society. So that's what a lot of these government entities deal with. So there's Individuals with Disabilities Act, and that's the IDEA. You might hear that a lot when it comes to the Department of Education. And that's basically saying that, or even when it comes to work, or how people should be treated in general. Like if they're able to take care of themselves, they should be able to rent a place. But basically just making sure that they are able to be treated as people, that they're able to, be given respect, that they are able to be given access to resources to help them for their lifelong conditions, that they are able to access medical interventions. Even though they might have a handicap, they are still able to get help in all ways. So if you want to learn more about that, you can look at page 148 and then also 149. It talks about disabilities that can affect children as far as autism, hearing, vision, epilepsy, ADHD, having more than one disability, how learning disabilities affect children, and that number has increased. Also, the tests to look for this has increased, and the services to look for it has increased. So a child who might just be staring out the window isn't just labeled as bad or as a student who doesn't care. It could be that the child has ADHD and they just have a hard time focusing on the teacher when maybe there's kids playing outside or construction going on outside. Some people are unable to focus on what they want to focus on, and so a lot of these programs are to take that into account, and to help them do the best that they can in life in general. When it comes to learning disabilities, there's evidence that um, children with disabilities are more likely to be enrolled in public school, and that children with disabilities are receiving special education services. So it's about a little less, about 42%. Well, these numbers are from 2014, so there would be updates now, but maybe about half of children that have a learning disability receive some help within school, and there are other children that receive help outside of school, so it might be both, that they are more likely to live in poverty and then remain in poverty as adults, that they might have social and emotional needs that's unique to them and that they have to learn how to cope with. They might have issues with learning or processing information, remembering things, perceiving things the way that the rest of the world might perceive it. They might not be able to generalize what they learned in one situation and apply it to other situations, which is what most people can do. They might have issues speaking, writing, understanding writing. They might have issues with math or calculating. They might have dyslexia. They might deal with depression. They're at greater risk for depression, social rejection from peers, adults, family members, and they are more at risk for suicidal thoughts and loneliness. Um, as far as disabilities and knowing what they are, it could be caused by terror children's, and that's just anything that could cause, like drugs or something that could cause a lot of issues with the baby. It also might be poisoning, lead poisoning. It could be something that's inherited from family members. It could be also if the parent has AIDS, or other conditions that make the child premature. So this does affect their learning and their self-esteem over time. Some people deal with learned helplessness. They learn that they're not doing things correctly, and they just learn that their parents might just help them through it, or their parents might do it for them or other people. So like they don't try new things and they don't progress forward because they don't see a point to it. And that has to do with self-esteem and social confidence, self-confidence. Um, there are interventions. It's very important that people with disabilities have goals. It might not be the goals that an average child might have or an exceptional child might have when it comes to learning, but they still can have goals based off of where they are now and where they want to be or where their parents or the school wants them to be, just to push them and get them to try. They have to deal with an acceptance of that they have a disability, but they might have other strengths. Having access to support through the community, through school, through programs, through federal funding, through the Department of Education, through having laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act, which protects them when it comes to those that try to work. Um, just having access to training, people that are supportive, people that love them for who they are, not for what they can or can't do. Um, what they can and can't do would just be something that's secondary, but their family loves them regardless. It's important that they have an educational environment that is continuously pushing them, that they have training with thinking of patterns, their thought processes, strategies for teaching, and then learning to want to teach, want to learn new things. They have self-instruction where they could learn. That's important for them to learn and to try new things. They have direct instructions where they're told to do things and it becomes a pattern over time. So they're able to deal with maybe any situation in a social setting. They can learn to ask for help. It's very, very important that they're loved, and the book, places a heavy emphasis on them being loved and not compared to others, and that people focus on their positive strengths and what they can do, and then use their weaknesses as something that they could build upon. Different types of counseling might be available for those with disabilities, and also the government might help with the funding for that. It just depends on the state and the type of disability the person has. There are policies that help with disability. So the All Handicapped Children Act of 1975. So that was passed before, but it helped individuals with disabilities. And then, of course, it was changed to the Individuals with Disabilities Act in 1990. Then there was Individuals and Disabilities Education Improvement Act, and that was last edited in 2004 until recently. But basically, they're saying people from birth to the age of 21 are able to get help, able to get funding for what they need in order to either survive. So it could be, the type of food they might need, or if they take TPN, or, the resources their parents might need to access in order to take care of that child full time. There are individual education programs that is through IDEA, which is part of the Department of Education. And those are the IEPs you might hear about with kids that have some type of disability that inhibits their learning. But it's still a way to make sure the child is able to get education and able to receive the support they need through public schooling. Back in the day, people with disabilities weren't able to go to school. They were put in asylums or put in the attic or just put in a room to just not really get much done or accomplish things. But Part C of the IDEA mandates that states provide early intervention services to children with developmental disabilities from birth to their third birthday. So that could be things like speech therapy, and that, resources and services that they might need when it comes to eating, when it comes to keeping their body healthy, all of that is covered for them up to age 21. And also, it's important that people understand that it's a law, and that's what the book focuses on, that it covers youths and it covers people up to age 21, that it mandates that people treat them with respect, that there are people, that they have financial and social services, that states and schools have a responsibility for people with disabilities, and that they have to provide services for people with disabilities. So it's a guaranteed right to education, and that was the IDEA Act of 1990, which is part of the Department of Education. Attention deficit disorder, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it's a syndrome in learning and deals with behavior problems before the age of 12. However, it can be diagnosed after 12. The child has inattention, excessive physical movement, they're impulsive, and it needs to appear in at least two settings. So it could be at church and at school. It could be at school and at home and at church. But there's places where the kid is that they're unable to control themselves in a way that other kids can, as far as sitting in class, accomplishing tasks and getting it done. It's more likely to affect boys than girls, and usually people notice it before the age of 7. And there is treatment for that. It could be medication, it could be therapy, it could be services, it could be educational services funded through the Department of Education. There is an ongoing study that's been going on since the 90s from the National Institute of Mental Health, basically looking at medications and psychosocial treatments and seeing which is better or if both is better. And so far, since they are able to have some findings, they're able to find that there's evidence in having both. However, some parents aren't okay with the medication, and there are some experimental types of situations kids can be on, dealing with marijuana or CBD oil that is funded through the government. It also depends on the state. Some people use herbs, natural remedies. Some people would focus on having like a quiet corner for kids that might need a place to decompress. So all of that just depends on the severity of the issues, what the parents are dealing with, how much time the parents have, what access to services kids have at school, the government funding, and then the funding from state government funds. Also funding for Medicaid, because kids with disabilities diagnosed are on Medicaid, because they're going to need a lot of resources and a lot of help, more so than health insurance, the regular health insurance, or average health insurance that people could get through their jobs. This will make sure that they're able to have protections in school, or protections with getting health care, IEPs, and then there's also IFSP, and that's individual family service plans, and that's having mediators, parent education, informal groups, case management. So the parents might have a meeting of the goals with the kids, and make sure the therapists, the head behavioral therapist, the school, just make sure private therapies that they might have, like everyone's on the same page of how to get the most out of this kid. Especially the younger they are, the more the kid will learn to cope and be able to function in daily life without help later on, or with minimal help later on.